In October 1929, U.S. stocks didn't just fall, they collapsed by almost 25% in a single day, wiping out more wealth in hours than the previous decade had created. It was the moment historians still call the most violent financial shock in modern American history. But here's the truth almost no one realizes. That collapse didn't destroy America. The country stumbled, suffered, and changed, but it survived. The American system endured because it still had structural strength, industrial momentum, and global dominance. Now fast forward to today. Because the warning signs appearing right now, quietly, slowly, but unmistakably, are deeper and more dangerous than anything the United States faced in 1929. And the painful irony is this: what America survived in 1929, it may not survive in 2026. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. It helps bring these truths to more people who aren't seeing the warnings yet. Most people believe 1929 was the biggest financial disaster of all time, but that's only because they've never truly studied what led to it. In 1929, the average American didn't have credit cards, car loans, or massive student debt. There was no $35 trillion national debt. There was no globalized supply chain vulnerable to geopolitical shock. And there definitely wasn't a financial system so interconnected that a single corporate failure could drag down multiple nations. In fact, the U.S. financial system in the 1920s was shockingly simple, almost primitive compared to today. A handful of banks dominated. Most Americans lived within their means, and the vast majority of households had zero leverage. The danger came from speculation, wild, uncontrolled speculation fueled by borrowed money, overconfidence, and a belief that the market could never fall. When the crash came, people panicked. But the country itself was still structurally strong enough to endure the hit. In 2026, the entire economic engine is built on leverage: consumer debt, corporate debt, government debt, real estate debt, unfunded pensions, global supply chain dependency, and the highest interest rate damage in 40 years. What America faced in 1929 was a financial fire. What it faces in 2026 is a financial forest made of dry wood. The cracks are already visible. Consumer debt is at an all-time high. Default rates are rising quietly but consistently. Mortgages are suffocating families. Corporate bankruptcies are up, especially among small and mid-sized businesses. Commercial real estate, once a stable backbone of American wealth, is now a slow-motion disaster as offices stand empty and leases go unpaid. Meanwhile, the national debt is spiraling into a direction economists whispered about, but no one took seriously until now. And unlike 1929, this time America isn't standing on solid ground. It's standing on quicksand. The most alarming indicator? The strength of the U.S. consumer is fading faster than policymakers are willing to admit. In 1929, Americans entered the crisis with savings. Today, they enter it with debt. In 1929, families owned their homes outright. Today, most are one interest rate shock away from drowning. In 1929, banks had problems, but they weren't holding trillions in derivatives tied to global flows. Today, banks are holding risk that no one can fully quantify. And then there's inflation. In the early 1920s, inflation wasn't the enemy, it was deflation. Prices were stable. The US dollar was strong. Today, the dollar is being quietly inflated away, not just by pandemic stimulus, but by decades of overspending, political paralysis, and an economy addicted to artificially cheap money. In 1929, the Federal Reserve was barely active. In 2026, the Federal Reserve is the entire financial system's spine, and if it cracks, everything cracks. The next shock won't come from where people expect. Not the stock market alone, not a single bank failure, not a sudden recession. The real danger lies in the compound effect. Multiple stresses hitting at once, each amplifying the other. Exactly what didn't happen in 1929. Take housing as an example. In 1929, home ownership was low. Today, millions depend on mortgages that became unmanageable after rates soared. Refinancing is nearly impossible. Home prices are dangerously inflated. Inventory is tight, and corporate landlords own more property than any citizens in history. If the housing market buckles, consumer spending collapses. If consumer spending collapses, corporate profits evaporate. And if corporate profits evaporate, layoffs skyrocket. In 1929, the country had fewer moving parts. Today, everything is connected and fragile. Even the global environment is different. In 1929, America was rising. In 2026, America is competing with expanding powers, de-dollarization movements, and growing geopolitical tensions. International confidence in U.S. stability is not guaranteed, and that matters more than most people realize. If foreign nations unwind U.S. Treasury positions or shift trade alliances, the impact would make 1929 look like a stumble. Then there's technology. Technology has accelerated both opportunity and vulnerability. Markets move faster, panic spreads instantly, and manipulation is easier. A rumor that took weeks to circulate in 1929 now takes seconds. Liquidity can vanish in a blink. Institutional moves can be triggered by algorithms, not humans. And unlike 1929, where bankers could literally meet in a room and halt a crash, today's system is too big, too fast, too digital. The more I analyze the data, and I've spent more than a decade studying market cycles, central bank behavior, and crisis signals, the clearer the pattern becomes. Every era has a breaking point. The US survived the Great Depression because it still held structural dominance. It had resources, manufacturing, innovation, and global trust. But in 2026, those foundations are weakened. The biggest mistake Americans make is believing, if we survived 1929, we can survive anything. But survival isn't guaranteed. Not when the ingredients are different. Not when the pressure is higher. Not when the entire system is stretched in ways that didn't exist a century ago. There's a blind confidence today that feels eerily similar to what newspapers printed in 1929. Assurances that the fundamentals are strong, that recession is unlikely, that markets will normalize soon. Every time I hear that, I remember reading old transcripts where experts said the same things right before the collapse. The truth is that 1929 didn't destroy America because America wasn't hollow back then. But 2026 might, because the cracks run all the way down to the foundation. The deeper you look, the more you realize the modern economy rests on narratives, not stability. Narratives fed by media, smoothed by politicians, and maintained by constant spending. But narratives can only last until the numbers prove them false. And numbers don't lie, they warn. There's a reason economists, investors, and analysts quietly use the phrase, the next great correction, when talking about the mid-2020s. They see what the average person doesn't. A system that's becoming too expensive to maintain, too stretched to stabilize, and too dependent on confidence that's starting to crack. What America is walking into isn't just a cycle. It's a convergence. A perfect storm of financial stress that no simulation from 1929 could predict. And when that storm hits, the question won't be whether the markets fall. The question will be whether the country can stand back up again the way it did in 1929, or whether 2026 becomes the moment historians mark as the year the system finally broke. People assume a nation collapses when markets fall, but markets are just the scoreboard. A country collapses when confidence dies. In 1929, confidence broke suddenly, violently, but people still believed in the system behind it. They still trusted the dollar, trusted their government, trusted the idea that America had a future worth rebuilding. Confidence cracked, but it didn't shatter. That's why the recovery, though brutal, was possible. Today, confidence is eroding in slow motion, not from one dramatic event, but from 1,000 quiet signals. You can hear it in conversations with ordinary families, people who once believed they were secure, but now whisper about how close they are to losing everything. You see it in savings rates that keep falling, credit card balances that keep rising, and a generation that openly calls the American dream a scam. You feel it in the way people no longer trust banks, institutions, or politicians. This slow erosion is far more dangerous than the sudden panic of 1929 because a slow erosion is harder to reverse. Look at the bond market. In 1929, U.S. government debt was manageable. Today, the interest alone on America's debt is approaching what the entire federal budget used to be. The country pays billions just to stay afloat, without touching the principal. And every time interest rates rise, that burden gets heavier. The government isn't functioning like a sovereign financial powerhouse anymore. It's functioning like a household living on minimum payments. That's a structural weakness no chart in 1929 ever displayed. Then there's the labor force. In 1929, America was young, expanding, optimistic. Today, the workforce is aging, exhausted, and overstressed. Quiet quitting, burnout, and a shrinking sense of loyalty to employers are symptoms of deeper problems. People aren't driven because they no longer feel the system rewards their effort. They're working harder than ever and getting less in return. Productivity isn't falling because people are lazy, it's falling because the reward for effort has collapsed. When the backbone of a nation feels betrayed, the economy feels it long before policymakers do. Corporate America knows this. You can see it in earnings calls. Executives talk about consumer fragility, tight discretionary spending, reduced purchasing power, delinquency growth. These aren't small hints. These are red flags. In the 1920s, corporations ignored the storm. Today, they can see it coming. But even they can slow it down because the system they operate in relies on endless consumption. If consumers stop spending, everything breaks. And consumers are stopping, not because they want to, but because they're running out of room. A financially trapped society becomes a powder keg. In 1929, people had less debt, fewer bills, fewer fixed obligations. They felt pain, but they didn't feel trapped the way people do today. A modern American household is tied to mortgages, car loans, insurance premiums, medical bills, credit lines, student debt, and rising grocery and energy costs. Every paycheck is already spent before it arrives. When that kind of society hits a downturn, people don't tighten their belts. They shatter. They default, downsize, move, break families, quit jobs, give up dreams. The emotional toll becomes economic gravity. Now think about what happens when markets feel that stress. In 1929, markets weren't globalized. Today, a shock in New York hits Tokyo, London, Frankfurt, and Singapore within seconds. An algorithm can start a cascade of selling before a human trader even blinks. The modern system is too fast, too interconnected, and too leveraged to contain a panic. That's why a crisis in 2026 wouldn't look like the slow-motion collapse of the Great Depression. It would look like a domino chain collapsing at the speed of light. But perhaps the biggest difference between then and now is leadership. In 1929, the government made mistakes, but it was dealing with a more unified nation. People trusted authority. Today, the country is ideologically fractured. Trust is fractured. Leadership is fractured. In a crisis, unity is the most valuable currency a nation can have, and America is dangerously short of it. If 2026 brings a major shock, who leads the recovery? Who restores confidence? Who convinces the public to stay calm, stay disciplined, and rebuild? The answer isn't clear, and that uncertainty alone is risk. And then there's the supply chain. In 1929, America was largely self-reliant. Factories, farms, materials, everything was mostly domestic. When the crash came, the economy suffered, but the infrastructure remained intact. Today, America is deeply dependent on foreign production. A crisis that impacts shipping, energy, or trade alliances could cripple supply lines in ways the Great Depression never saw. Shortages create panic. Panic creates instability. Instability creates collapse. People assume that if 2026 becomes a crisis year, the Federal Reserve will simply bail out the system the way it has before. Print more money, cut rates, restore liquidity. But that assumes inflation is not a threat. In 1929, the Fed had room to print money. Today, printing money can push inflation back into chaos. The very tool America used to survive 2008 and 2020 could become the reason it fails in 2026. When your main defense becomes your main vulnerability, the crisis that follows is never mild. America's strength has always been its ability to reinvent itself. Innovation, courage, resilience. These traits carried the country through wars, depressions, and disruptions. But reinvention requires energy, confidence, and a foundation strong enough to stand on. What worries economists today is not the crash itself. It's the fear that America no longer has the structural surplus needed to reinvent at scale. When debts are high, trust is low, global pressure is rising, and internal division is growing, reinvention becomes harder. In 1929, America had room to fall because the ground beneath it was solid. In 2026, The ground is already shaking. Look at interest rates. When rates rise, the foundation cracks. Mortgages freeze. Businesses pull back. Layoffs begin. Banks tighten lending. Consumers panic. The economy slows. And once that cycle starts, a recession becomes a depression when the cracks spread from finance into psychology. We're seeing those cracks now. Quietly, slowly, but unmistakably. As a financial expert, I look for certain signals, patterns that repeat across history. One of the most reliable signals is behavioral. In the years before major crashes, people stop believing things will get better. In the years before recoveries, people start to feel hope. Today, hope is disappearing. And when hope disappears, spending disappears. When spending disappears, the recession arrives. When recession arrives with high debt, inflation, rising rates, global stress, and fragile confidence, you get a collapse. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes loudly. The same warning signs that appeared before 1929, overconfidence, speculative bubbles, rising inequality, political tension, economic imbalances, are appearing again. But the stakes are higher. The system is more complex. The safety nets are weaker, and the public is more fragile. The Great Depression didn't destroy America because America was still strong underneath. But today, beneath the surface, America looks tired, worn, over-leveraged, distracted, divided, and losing the one thing that keeps nations alive: shared belief in tomorrow. If 2026 brings the shock many economists expect, the real question won't be how deep the crash is. The question will be whether the country still has the unity, the stability, and the structural strength to climb back up again. Because the Great Depression tested America's economy, the next collapse may test America's identity. And once identity breaks, recovery becomes something far more complicated than just money. The most dangerous illusion in modern finance is the belief that America is too big, too powerful, too central to fail. That belief is exactly what blinds societies before disaster. In 1929, the belief was arrogance. In 2026, the belief is denial. Denial that debt matters. Denial that inflation has consequences. Denial that global trust can break. Denial that a nation can reach a point where pressure outweighs resilience. Every empire in history collapsed under the weight of its own denial, not its enemies. The signs are everywhere, but people ignore them because acknowledging the truth feels terrifying. When families can't afford homes, groceries, or medical bills, they blame themselves, not the system. When wages stagnate but prices rise, they think they're failing, not the policy. When opportunities shrink, they assume they're unlucky, not that the country is entering a structural decline. That's how collapse begins, not with panic, but with fatigue. A population too tired to question why everything feels harder than it used to. In 1929, families had less, but they expected less. Life was simple, predictable, grounded. Today, life is fragile by design. One job loss, one rate hike, one emergency, and a household collapses financially. Americans live closer to the edge than they admit. The system trained them to depend on credit, loans, and constant spending. That dependence becomes a noose during downturns. In 1929, scarcity was a shock. In 2026, scarcity will be a revelation. The wealth gap is another silent fault line. In the 1920s, inequality was growing but still manageable. In 2026, the gap is historic. The top owns almost everything, the middle is shrinking, and the bottom is suffocating. When inequality becomes extreme, societies break, not because the poor rebel, but because the middle gives up. The middle class is the engine of America. When the engine runs out of fuel, the vehicle stops, no matter who's driving. Debt amplifies this fragility. In 1929, total U.S. debt, government, corporate, and household, was a fraction of today's levels. Now, the system is addicted to borrowing. Every crisis is solved by injecting more debt. Every slowdown is fixed with more debt. Every political promise is funded by more debt. At some point, the weight becomes unbearable. Debt isn't just a financial burden, it becomes a psychological one. The nation carries a stress no spreadsheet can measure. Consider what happens when people lose faith in the future. They stop taking risks, stop investing, stop spending, stop believing leaders, stop believing promises. Hope collapses quietly, and when hope collapses, the economy follows. Financial crashes don't destroy nations. Loss of belief does. In 1929, belief survived. In 2026, belief is already fading. This time, the danger doesn't come from a single point of failure. It comes from all directions at once. A fragile consumer, an overstretched government, an aging workforce, geopolitical threats, monetary exhaustion, technological disruption, a divided public. Each problem alone is manageable. Together, they become something far more dangerous than the Great Depression ever was. The irony is that modern America appears prosperous on the surface. Record stock prices, record corporate profits, record asset valuations. But beneath that glitter is rot. The rises are artificial, inflated by cheap money and government stimulus. The prosperity is borrowed, not earned. And borrowed prosperity always demands repayment, with interest. But the harshest truth is this: the country is more vulnerable today because the world is different. In 1929, America was ascending. It was young, hungry, and expanding. In 2026, the country is older, slower, less united, and facing competitors who want its place in the global order. If the U.S. stumbles today, other nations won't wait. They'll move into the space America once owned effortlessly. A collapse today isn't just financial, it's geopolitical. And yet, the average person feels none of this. Life continues at a familiar pace. People still shop, work, travel, scroll, and survive. Crises don't announce themselves. They build in silence. That's the most terrifying part. No one in 1929 woke up expecting disaster. No one in 2008 expected collapse. And no one in 2026 will expect what's coming, until it hits with a force that feels sudden but was decades in the making. Still, collapse isn't destiny. Crisis is not final. What matters is whether a country has enough strength left to rise from the wreckage. The real danger is not the crash. It's the condition of the country when the crash arrives. In 1929, America had unity, belief, and raw strength. In 2026, the nation faces the storm with division, exhaustion, and record-breaking dependency on debt. When a storm hits a weakened structure, the damage is deeper. The most painful truth is this: America isn't being destroyed by an enemy. It's being destroyed by weight. Weight from within. Debt, division, distrust, dependency, denial. These are the true threats. And they grow every year. But collapse doesn't always look like flames and chaos. Sometimes it looks like slow decline, higher prices, fewer opportunities, shrinking dreams, quiet desperation. A generation realizing they will not live better than the one before them. A nation no longer confident in its own story. That is collapse wearing a friendly mask. The real fear isn't that 2026 will repeat 1929. It's that it will surpass it. Not because the crash is bigger, but because the country is weaker. 1929 tested America's economy. 2026 may test America's resilience. And if the country fails that test, the world will change in ways we can't yet imagine. But here's the truth I've learned after 10+ years in this field. Collapses don't destroy nations. People giving up does. If Americans realize what's coming, if they prepare, adapt, and awaken before the shock arrives, the country can still survive. But if the warning signs go ignored, if the denial continues, if the cracks keep widening, then the Great Depression will no longer be the nation's darkest financial moment. History will rewrite itself, and 2026 may become the year the world says, this was the crash America couldn't stand back up from. The final outcome depends on whether the country confronts the truth in time. Because the 1929 crash didn't destroy America, but the next one might.